Linda had mentioned that several people talked to her about Turkeywork, and it's not unusual for me to have to teach it twice. Oftentimes, when I had my own store, people would understand how to do it. They were sure they could accomplish, and then the next morning they'd be back in with their canvas pleading for help. So I'm about to show you Turkeywork, and again, this can be used as the center of a circle. It could be a pom-pom. It could be, let's see, a beard. It could be fur on the coat. Some of you are still doing Christmas stuff. And it is a little bit tricky. Honestly, a lot of our stitches historically come to us from embroidery, particularly from crewel embroidery. And so we work top level and underneath as well. Well, Raya or turkey work actually comes to us from weaving, which is interesting. And you never see the weaver working underneath her loom. It's all everything on the top surface. So if you remember that, you'll know that everything you do with turkey work is on top surface. In the Raya world, Raya rug world, when the girl does that loop, she usually puts it on an apparatus that looks like a ruler. So when she pulls the thread over, I'll use my pen as an example. When she pulls the loop over, that loop is always the same size because the ruler is there to guide how long those loops have to be. And at the very end of a row, then she takes a sharp razor and just goes right down the middle. There's a little ditch in that ruler, and she cuts it, and boom, all the little loops are exactly the same. We don't tend to do that, although I've had customers that had trouble with looping, and I suggested that you loop your thread over a straw, and then at the end pull the straw out, and then all the loops are the same size. That's only critical if you do not plan to cut the loops. They're going to be like curly bangs or curly tail of some sort, and you want the loops to stay, then they have to all be the same size. If you're going to trim, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Okay, so all top side, we are not going to worry at all about a waist knot. We're just going to start right in. Put that so you can see it. I'm beginning at the top, on the top of the canvas, but if this were actually going to be something that I was going to really use, I would begin at the bottom row of that white area that's going to be, let's say, the fur. Let me cut these strings off here. So I'm going to come front to back, and I'm going to leave a tail. Let me get this out. So front to back, and then I'm going to slide to the left. I have to set this so you guys can see here. There we go. So I'm going to come up again to the left of where I just went down, the very next hole. If I can find it here. There. And then I'm going to swing back to the very first area. You're really working over 3 holes. My thread is caught here. Just a sec. So I came from front, let's do that again. Front to back through a center hole. That's, if you technically call that hole number 2, it'll make sense. Then you're going to slide over to the left for hole number 3. That brings me to the top again. And then I'm going to go all the way over to hole number 1. Let me pull that through so you can see. And what I've just created is that very first long stitch. Now, I sometimes suggest if you're careful, you can lift up that lock and then find that middle hole again, which we refer to as hole number 2, come up. And when you do so, you can lock down again, tighten it back down. Otherwise, it's really hard to find that hole. If you don't lift up, it's really difficult to find. I used to say, come up through the garbage. And it feels like that. And especially if you're working with a thread that splits, you don't want to ruin that lockdown. So lift it up. You saw me do that. Lift it up a little bit, find the hole, and then pull your needle to the top side again. Now I'm ready to do the second loop. I'm going to go to the next hole available. I'm going to leave my loop. And I'm going to go to the third hole, or the left again. It's left for a loop, left for a lock. I'm going to do my lock now. my lock is going to hold onto the first lock. And at this point, I'm going to leave that upwards so I can find the hole that I can come up in. I'm watching my computer and not my stitching here. Okay. And when I come up in that middle hole, I can then lock down again. So it's left for a loop, left for a lock, and then, as I said to you, up through the garbage. I did it without leaving the loop just so you could see how it would work. And if you feel comfortable, you can find that hole without leaving the bigger loop. That's fine too. So left for a loop, left for a lock. Whoops, hit the wrong hole. Left for a loop, left for a lock. And then let's assume this is my last row. I'm just going to come up and split right in and pull my thread up. And I can just trim. Now, I never was looking underneath my canvas at all. The whole time was all top surface. Now, I suggested to you that if you were doing fur, that this would be the bottom row of white, let's say, on the Santa suit. The next row up, from there, you're moving upward. And the reason you do this first row down low, when you are stitching, it's really hard to lift up this part. If you had turkey work up here, it'd be really hard to do the next rows. This is much easier because you can hold it down with your thumb. So again, if I were doing the next row, now this is another question that comes up to me often. Do I have to hit every row? It depends what kind of fur you want. If you want it really plush, then you probably have to do every row. But if it's okay, if it doesn't have to be as thick as a bunny's coat, then it's fine to skip the row and go to the next one. You don't want bald scalp in between, so this, so you can kind of see, whoops, my thread got caught. Well, you get the idea, I think, and then I have this wonderful graph that I will PDF Linda. Let's get this down so you can see it. This will give you some idea of how this works. Just remember, up through the garbage. I have one cute little story to share with you about up through the garbage. Years ago when I had my own store and I was teaching this at a night class, and the next morning, because I worked late, somebody else opened the store for me. And when I finally came in about an hour late, the clerk said to me, "By the way, we got our first phone call today." And what happened? She said, "Well, somebody called and said, what do you do when you come up, after you come up through the garbage?" Oh, that's the story. So she had never heard that before. So anyway, so up through the garbage means you're sneaking under this little loop, that lockdown. And if your thread is very delicate, you want to be sure to leave the loop so you're not abusing the thread. So there you can now do something fuzzy, which is great fun. Any questions on turkey work?
June, I have one. It's Denise.
Hi, Denise.
Hi. When you trim this, it always looks like when you trim the loops, they're going to hang down rather than standing up. How short do you have to get them until they actually stand up?
I think about maybe less than ½ inch, and then they will. Okay. And remember, when you trim a piece of thread, the ends will blossom. This end that you see will actually get fuzzier. So when you first trim it, it's blunt, and then after it's been handled a little bit, then it'll fuzz up and it'll fill in those places. So about ½ inch if you just want it to be a little fuzz. But if you want it to be really fur, then you have to go longer. So, and the other thing I should say, which we didn't address, is when you're doing the trim job, maybe you're cutting your husband's hair because no barbers are open yet. Well, it's the same idea with turkey work. In fact, Doug asked me to trim his hair the other day. I said, no worries, I trim bears all the time, so I can do this. So when you're trimming, you kind of want to have a convex look to it. So the ends are going to be lower and the middle is going to be higher. I have something I can demonstrate that with. Hold on just a sec. But the trimming is short on the ends and high in the middle. So let me get this here.
Manicure scissors.
So
It's really sharp scissors.
okay. Yes, very sharp scissors, and preferably a tiny scissor, not like this guy. This is far too big. Linda sells some beautiful scissors that you can work with for sure. So when you're trimming, this is what you want to have happen. You want it to be high in the middle and low on the edges, and that will create the pom-pom look. If it's a whole ruff on the coat, again, high in the middle, low on the sides, and that will give you that beautiful look. And that sculpted look, Denise, might be what you're after when you want it to have the poof looking up at you rather than sideways. Like the center of the sunflower, you want that poofy to be up, and you can do that with that proper trimming. I usually don't trim until the very end. Don't trim each row, because then you're fighting the little fluffy ends. Trim at the very end of the procedure.
June, what threads do you like to work with for turkey work?
My most favorite of late has become Burma. They have very fine hairs, and I often work with about 4-ply on 13 mesh, and then I don't have to hit every row. I like to do maybe 2 or 3 on 18 mesh, surprisingly. And then I do on 18, if I only do 2, I have to do every row. Otherwise, it looks like they're scalp. You know, they need some Rogaine or something to fill in. So I make sure that
you just said, please.
Yeah, my most favorite thread for doing fur is probably Burma. Burma is an interesting thread. It is partly acrylic and partly wool. It's like an old sweater. And Denise, this would answer for you too, because after it's been trimmed, it fuzzes a lot, so and fills in. If you did every row in white, it looks just like an Angora bunny. So that, for doing turkey work, I really like Burma. Anything that's singular, and I used a single thread to demonstrate for you today, just because I wanted you to see the stitch and not be so concerned about the thread. But if you're doing a single ply like this, you're not going to get the fuzz that you would with Burma, which has multiple hairs.
And so how many ply do you use?
On 13 mesh, I use usually 4, possibly 5 if it's quite thin. White tends to be fluffier than the other colors. The reason being, it has not been dyed. So what you're looking at is the virgin wool. It's fluffier than one that has gone through the dye process. So usually I can get by with 4-ply on white on 13, but I have to increase it by 1 if it's a color. I have to have a sip of water here.
And then on 18?
On 18, I use 2 to 3, again, depending on the color.
If you add Whisper, what would you do there to the Burma?
Whisper counts as 1 Burma.
Gotcha.
Okay. I don't do that as much. I used to do that a lot, and I'm getting nice results just with Burma, so I tend not to mix the threads anymore like I used to on fur. So. But single ply is not going to blossom as much as it would if it were a multiple ply. Just remember that. So stop the share here.
What I was going to say is I want to sing Linda's praises as a turkey work trimmer.
Yes.
She does an amazing job.
Yeah. It takes somebody very patient to do it and a really sharp pair of scissors.
Yeah. That's it, the sharp scissors.
Right. And Linda has many that are beautiful. So.
Yeah, and the shop also carries a special turkey work scissors.
I was just going to ask about those.
They're kind of L-shaped.
Okay.
And they were actually introduced for the rugs. Remember I told you Raya was a rug technique?
Yeah.
It was used in rug making. And so it's L-shaped, so it gets into the groove. I still find a very fine little scissor I got at Linda's to be the best answer for trimming. But you might try it. Linda, if you have one, you could let them, when they come in to try it, you could do that.
The other one that I have is actually a scissor. It's curved on the end, so you get that convex
Yeah.
look that you were describing.
Right.
So,
we want it poofy in the middle and short on the sides. Poofy
right.
in the middle and short on the sides.